I don't want no oil spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good morning, Bowling Green. Good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to everyone on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here with my incredible co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, together, Rebecca and I are about to craft an hour of incredibly informative and interesting radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health, the happiness of the little field mice and the hawks that feed on the field mice and the fox that also catch the field mice, and pretty much everybody and everything, because, like it or not, all of us are together on this fantastic planet called Earth. So we've got a good show lined up for you today. We're going to just chat for another 10 minutes or so here. And then we have an interview I'm really proud of. Managed to land an interview with a fellow named Daniel Simons, who is the lead attorney for Greenpeace in Europe. And the reason I'm interviewing him is because they just had this big victory against Shell Oil. And so it's always good to celebrate the wins, especially when you're taking on like the biggest companies in the world and you manage to beat them in court. That's something I think it's important for people to know about. Then we're going to talk to Rebecca. And what do you have on tap today, Rebecca?
Today, we are talking about a species so recently discovered by Western science that it hasn't even been named yet. So I'm calling it, I've been through the Andes on a catfish with no name.
Okay, so cool. And then we will have ecological news, and hopefully at some point during this hour, we'll hear from you at 877-909-1007. And next week's show is going to be probably our clip show going back over 2024. So this is the week to call in, because otherwise you'd have to hold on to those ecological questions.
Don't bottle it up, people.
Yeah, let it out. Give us a call.
Anyway.
877-909-1007. All right, so today, driving in, of course, was incredibly wet.
Yes.
Rebecca and I were driving through Toledo there, and we looked kind of like a speedboat sometimes because we had a wake.
I was seriously concerned.
Yeah.
We're not going to get all the way down Berdan.
Yeah. But luckily, of course, the Wonder Van was up to it. But I went to a nice holiday party there last night, and one thing I noticed, and tell me, call me and tell me if you think this is true, but it seems like the weather is no longer a safe conversation topic. You know what I mean?
Probably, yeah.
For most of my life, if you were in a bunch of people, and you didn't know most of them, and you just wanted to start talking about something, you'd bring up the weather.
So now we're down to really just the safe topic, maybe being sports.
Sports is it.
Which is why we need this channel.
Yeah, exactly.
If you need to learn to talk about that, because anything else starts fist fights.
Right, yeah, because you can't mention the weather and then because politically some people will go, weather, yes, global warming, no global warming. And yeah, so people just stopped talking about it.
Of course, I'm thinking about the Jane Austen adaptation where Kate Winslet and Emma Stone or Emma Thompson are there, and the suitor comes to call, and they're saying, "How is the weather? The roads were very dry." It's
Yes.
like a running joke.
Warm for the time of year. Yes. Yeah. Well, but of course we are
The
having.
roads were not very dry today.
No.
Not at all.
Although yesterday I did go for a walk along the Maumee, and it's still low.
Yeah,
So you
okay.
could walk across it actually in spaces.
Wow.
So it is good that we're getting rain.
Right.
But just a reminder, today we're not gonna stay away from the weather. It's not taboo for us.
We're all about the weather.
Yeah, because today is it's probably going to get up to 60 degrees here in Toledo, and this rain looks like it's going to be about 2 inches of rain.
And I'm wearing a sweater dress because they told me it was winter.
Yeah, fooled you.
Yeah.
You just thought because we went past winter solstice and
Right.
Christmas, it would be cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so 60 degrees, which is 22 degrees above average. And actually, all this rain we're getting is supposed to be snow.
Yeah.
Frankly, this is supposed to be
Yeah.
like 6 or 8 inches of snow instead of 2 inches of rain. And, the wildlife are actually quite confused. I went for another walk earlier in the week out there on Slippery Elm, and we were surprised because this huge flocks of sandhill cranes were going overhead, headed north. They're heading home already.
Oh,
It's
Lord.
they winter down there in New Mexico and Texas.
You know what's on my front lawn right now?
No, what?
I keep walking past it and thinking, oh, that looks like a mushroom or something. But no, it's a frozen dandelion.
Oh, dandelion.
Yeah. Like it started to blossom and then just froze.
Right. What we
Like you
had.
never see that. My whole life, like they sort of quietly fade away before they can freeze.
Yeah.
That was a totally new thing, and it's small, but when you live for 58 years and then something like that suddenly happens, you start to think, something's weird.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we did have the very brief, very cold snap, and all the animals and plants are confused. Yesterday when I was out walking, we saw bugs crawling around, and I have this little elderberry bush that I've been meaning to plant, and it hasn't lost its leaves. It still thinks it's like, early fall, and of course there's no ice to speak of on the Great Lakes, even though it's almost the new year. So it's kind of like the world is being like pasteurized, because we do have these brief, intense cold snaps that will freeze like your dandelion.
Yep.
But most of the year has been really warm, and of course the trend is clear. Like with the ice, for example, ice on the Great Lakes has declined 65% in the past 26 years. Now, they were, at the start of December, they were predicting that this year's ice, this is the National Ice Center, which I actually didn't know we had a National Ice Center, but they were predicting near normal levels of ice on the Great Lakes. But that was before we had the super warm December. Now, last year was record low. We only got up to 4.3% ice coverage in the lakes in 2023. And there is supposedly a cold snap coming next week. NOAA is predicting the 8 to 14 day schedule says we're going to have way below temperatures next week. But the whole situation is that everything is, the weather is out of whack, and people don't like to talk about it because they feel like there's nothing they can do about it, but there is. That's the whole point of this show, that we can get to the green future if we all try.
Yeah.
If we just keep getting cars, running on diesel, getting 8 miles to the gallon, then we won't. And there was an article in The Guardian on the 27th, that said, the title is, "We Need Dramatic Social and Technological Changes. Is Societal Collapse Inevitable?" And basically, it's a review of books and articles that describe how societies collapse. And the long and short of it is that basically societies collapse when they don't adapt to changing situations.
Right.
You
It
know,
stands to reason, doesn't it?
right. I mean, a lot of the times they'll hold on to old technologies, even as those technologies, for example, deplete the soil, so there's no nutrition in the crops, or cause the local water to dry up, so that they don't have water.
This is something I heard about the Roman emperors, that the Roman Empire, is that they actually they were smart enough. They had guys who were smart enough to come up with more machine oriented technology. They just didn't bother because it was easier to just conquer more people and get more slaves. They
Yeah.
didn't need labor saving devices. They had slaves.
When they had labor, free
Right.
labor.
Yeah,
Right. Why
exactly.
save labor? Look, let's get another country.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, yeah, and that kind of fossilized thinking is what causes societies to collapse. And so
Also, the whole lead pipes, solid lead pipes thing, for lead wine casks, bad idea.
yeah, lead poisoning is another reason. And there were people in the Roman Empire who looked at the data and said, "Hey, we're poisoning ourselves with lead. It's causing us to be idiots." But but the society didn't react because lead is such a great metal and so easy to work with, and you can mold it into all kinds of stuff. And,
Kind of like
and the
plastic.
economy was dependent on
Remind you
it.
of anything we use now.
Yeah, and it reminds me specifically of the fossil fuel industry, because
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
literally the fossil fuel industry has to die for our society to survive. Because we've got another story coming up in the ecological news about just how hot we've gotten, and it's really clear. The data is clear. The scientists are there saying we need to get rid of these lead pipes. We need to stop putting carbon in the air. And so what's kind of interesting is that the people that are being looked at as like radicals and a threat to society, like Greenpeace protesters who like occupy oil platforms, or they occupy boats that are carrying plastic, and those people many people see them as sort of a threat to civil society, but what they're actually doing is literally trying to save civil society. It's really weird. And that's why situations are so critical when these big corporations, which has to die, okay, Shell Oil has to die, frankly. We've got to shut down all those wells. We should not be building new wells or new pipelines. We should be transitioning away as fast as we possibly can. But when a corporation like that goes up against and tries to crush Greenpeace or similar organizations or citizens groups, they're actually trying to wreck the society. They're like the Roman Empire companies that are like, we could just keep using lead, right? So we're a little more stupid, but we could still make decisions, right, guys? Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
So that's why I was so happy to get this interview with Daniel Simons, who's from Greenpeace, because really their victory, Greenpeace's victory in this lawsuit, is literally a victory for everybody in the world, because Shell did not get what it wants. So let's go to that interview now. All right. Well, hello and welcome to For a Green Future. Could you please share with us your name and title?
My name is Daniel Simons, and my title is Senior Legal Counsel for Strategic Defense at Greenpeace International.
All right. Well, thank you very much for making the time to talk with us today. So earlier this month, Greenpeace had a great victory battle against Shell Oil. So before we get into the specifics of that victory, I want to point out this is considered a SLAPP lawsuit, SLAPP. Could you quickly review what a SLAPP lawsuit is and why so many groups, including the organization CASE, thought this was one?
So a SLAPP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation, and it's basically a lawsuit where a wealthy individual or a company uses its financial muscle to try and silence an opponent through legal action. So they bring a lawsuit not because they think they have a good case, but because they think they can drain the opponent's resources through legal action and cause intimidation and silence the opponent just by imposing the cost and the inconvenience of legal process. As for the the Shell case and why many people saw it as a slap suit. Shell initially tried to settle with us on terms that were very oppressive. So they threatened to ramp up the claim to was about $8.5 million, but they offered that they would reduce this to to settle for $1.4 million, as well as a promise that Greenpeace would never engage in any further protests at sea or in ports against their infrastructure. And the ultimate claim was for a lower amount, was only for $1 million. So, clearly they were trying to use the threat of a huge damage claim to induce us to settle in a way that would really limit our freedom of expression.
So like never again having Greenpeace do any direct action against Shell is what.
Yeah, well, at least at sea or in ports. So what they were asking for was to be specific, no direct action protests that inconvenience their equipment at sea or in ports. And this goes well beyond anything that a court could ever award them, but they were hoping to get that through a settlement.
Okay, well, that goes to my next question then. So what was the action that precipitated their lawsuit? What was the excuse for bringing their suit? And what were they alleging? And again, more of what they were trying to get from you in court.
Yes. So Shell is busy constructing what's going to be their first manned platform in the North Sea for 30 years in a field called Penguins. They had the platform built in China, and we're transporting it to Norway to have final work done on it before deployment in the Penguins oil field. And as the platform was being transported in the Atlantic Ocean off the Canary Islands, Greenpeace activists boarded it and established a protest camp. And they stayed on board for 13 days, all the way until arrival in Norway. We are very clear from the start that this was meant to be a non-obstructive protest. So the activists were on board, but they were not hindering in any way. They were not damaging anything, not trying to change this vessel with the platform on board from its course. So when Shell brought its damage suit, they accepted there was no delay to the transport of the platform. Nothing was damaged on board. They actually alleged that a padlock was damaged. That was the only damage that they claimed was caused, something we denied. Obviously, not a huge financial value attached to that. So how did they come to $1 million in damages? They alleged that that was the amount of money that they had spent in responding to the protests. They claimed that there was a risk, for example, that the activists might have fallen off the platform and that they had to, ensure that there was a recovery plan for them. So they sent, for example, an extra ship to sail alongside the platform at a cost of $500,000. They also, had their executives fly to crisis management meetings, at high cost, spending time in expensive hotels. They, hired private security guards in the port where the platform was due to be delivered. They installed cameras. They ramped up costs in all sorts of ways, and they were seeking recovery of those costs from Greenpeace International and Greenpeace UK.
Because you got to spend a night at that expensive hotel if there's a crisis. Obviously, you got to learn to relax there. So happily, Shell did not get anything near what it wanted. Well, it didn't actually lose the case in court. You folks were able to negotiate a settlement. And could you tell us a little bit about that settlement?
Yes, so the main terms of the settlement are that we agreed, we being Greenpeace International and Greenpeace UK, to pay a sum jointly to a third-party charity, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution in the UK, £300,000. And in addition, we agreed for periods ranging from 5 to 10 years not to protest at 4 sites in the North Sea. One of them being the Penguins field, where the platform that was the subject of this protest was headed. And 2 of those fields are actually mature, not places where we would ever actually have an interest in protesting. And then there's another field that is actually the subject of an ongoing lawsuit between Greenpeace UK and Shell. So that's being challenged in court rather than through protests, and that will remain that way. So we had to make some concessions to get this case settled, but we still regard this as a favorable outcome. £300,000 obviously is a significant sum, but had we gone on to win the case, we would have ended up with a higher amount of costs, we think, that would have been unrecoverable from Shell. So even in a scenario where we would win the case. So spending this amount of money in the end is, makes good commercial sense, so to speak, even though it's a substantial sum. And we're of course happy that it's not going to Shell, but to a charity whose work we value.
Well, that's good. And I think it's safe to say this is not just a legal battle. Many people in the UK were motivated by the injustice of the whole situation. And there was a lot of public pressure brought against Shell to drop it. And could you tell us what that pressure looked like? And I understand there were some celebrities involved.
There were a number of well-known comedians from the UK were involved who, made videos. We were allowed to use a segment from the Succession series where one of the characters, Greg, announces that he's planning to sue Greenpeace and he's, ridiculed by his interlocutors. We used that to great effect in a viral video where, we said, we called the lawsuit the Cousin Greg lawsuit. And that kind of stuck. That was actually even the headline in the Financial Times after the case was settled. Shell settles Cousin Greg lawsuit. A lot of supporters came to our help, signing petitions, sending emails to the CEO of Shell asking him to drop the case, donating to the Stop Shell Fund, which was used to cover some of the expenses of the defense of the case and so on.
That's great. It seems to have had an effect. Or would you say that your impression is that it did have an effect on Shell?
Yeah, I'm convinced that Shell went into this case, expecting us to settle in a way that would substantially curtail our ability to protest against them, or to take the case to trial and hoping to secure a win that would be very expensive for us. One key fact about this case is that although the headline figure that Shell was claiming was $1 million, they were planning to spend £8.5 million on their defense. And had the court allowed that, and had we lost the case, we would have been on the hook for that sum. And I suspect they were engaged in a tactic of deliberately ramping up their costs precisely in order to bludgeon us effectively into a settlement by the fear of having potentially being on the hook for these costs.
I see. So now this isn't Greenpeace's first legal victory this year. There was one in France that could you tell us a little bit about what happened there with the Total Energy
Yes.
lawsuit?
So there's a connection between Total and Shell, the company we're talking about before, which is that their business is roughly in the same order of size. They produce, well, not exactly the same amount of oil and gas, but the size of the businesses is comparable. And what Greenpeace France noticed is that both companies report their carbon footprints to the public. And the year they looked at, which if I remember correctly was 2019, had Shell reporting a carbon footprint that was several times, I believe about 3 times higher than Total's. And of course, they found this suspicious and they were wondering whether Total's reporting is accurate. So what Greenpeace France did was they commissioned an independent consultancy that is specialized in assessing the carbon footprint of a business to sort of reverse engineer, to look at what's known about the size of Total's business and what it consists of, and to try to calculate what their carbon footprint is. Now, there are obviously uncertainties in that because they're not very transparent about exactly how much oil and gas they produce, and generally what their business looks like. But the company came to an estimate that was about 3.5 times higher than Total's reported carbon footprint. And obviously Greenpeace France drew attention to this finding. They said, this figure is perhaps not entirely accurate, but it raises huge questions about what's behind this gap, and it certainly casts a question mark over the reliability of the figures that Total is reporting. Well, after that report, Total actually took Greenpeace France to court. It looked a bit like a defamation lawsuit, but they used a specific article of the commercial code in France, which makes it a tort to spread incorrect information about a listed company. So they invoked that article and took Greenpeace France to court, asking for basically for the report to be taken offline, and for some costs that they incurred in bringing the case. They were not asking for compensation beyond €1 in symbolic damages, but they were nevertheless trying to challenge the findings of this analysis. In the end, the court ruled that the case was not admissible because Total had not clearly enough formulated exactly what statements they were taking issue with. So their case was insufficiently clearly stated in order to enable Greenpeace France to respond effectively to it. And for that reason, they were declared to be inadmissible, and the case was closed. So yeah, an important win for Greenpeace France there.
Cool. Yeah. All right. So direct action has always been part of Greenpeace's DNA. Just at the COP in South Korea last month, there was some direct action taken against plastics, for example.
Yes.
Do you think this victory will help ensure Greenpeace is able to continue its history of peaceful direct action into the future?
You mean the victory against Shell?
Yes.
Yes. So I think absolutely yes. I think it was quite striking that Shell decided to bring this case. It wasn't the first time that there had been a direct action protest, not in general, and certainly not from Greenpeace. Not the first time, but it's the first time I recall that they brought a civil suit where they were actually seeking damages rather than an injunction, which has happened often before. And I think that was quite a deliberate escalation, that they were, trying to step up the pressure against activism directed against them. And I would think they will feel that they haven't gotten out of this case what they were hoping. It became a real rallying point for civil society in the UK. It attracted a huge amount of criticism to them. And in the end, they were forced to settle, without receiving any payments and without receiving anything near the commitment in terms of an end to protest that they were looking for. So I hope that this result will mean that they think twice before bringing a similar suit again in future. And I also hope that it sends a message to other similar companies that there will be a blowback if you try to bring a slap suit of that nature against Greenpeace in future.
All right. Is there still any of this case that's being litigated, or you mentioned that there's some litigation around the direct action in the oil fields, some of the North Sea oil fields?
So yes, Greenpeace UK has a number of pending challenges against oil and gas fields operated by Shell in the North Sea. The Jackdaw field, I think, is one of them. That's one of the fields that is part of the settlement. So there will not be direct action protests there, but there is an ongoing lawsuit challenging the failure to quantify the climate impact of that development. So an environmental impact assessment was done, but it looked only at the more localized impact and not at the impact on climate change. And of course, that's a very important part of the environmental impact of a field and ought to be taken into account. And there is a ruling of the UK Supreme Court, a fairly recent ruling, which confirms that there is a need to also look at climate impacts when undertaking an oil or gas development of that kind.
All right, great. Well, that's about all we have time for. Is there anything you would like to add?
I think that's it from my side. Thanks, Joe.
Yes, and thank you folks for listening to that. He got kind of lawyerly there. It wasn't perhaps the most animated of guests, but he
lawyers will do that.
Yeah, but he really good news over there in Europe. So we're very grateful that he was on the air, and we're grateful for you for listening, and we're grateful to our patrons. Our patrons are wonderful people who've gone to patreon.com. That's Patreon. There they signed up to be patrons, that select group of wonderful people who every month a little bit comes out of their account, comes over to us, and that's how we manage to keep this show on the air and bring you vital information because, that story should have been headlines, but I had a very hard time even finding out that this had happened. So this is the kind of stuff I could share with you folks that you're probably not going to get anywhere else. Also, if you are someone who has a business that is at all related to the environment, maybe a nice organic lawn care business, or maybe you have a vegan restaurant or something, this would be the perfect show for you to advertise on because our listeners are people who care about that sort of thing, and this is a good way to reach them. So just go to Joe DeMare forAgreenfuture.org. That's JoeDemare greenfuture.org, and drop us an email, and we'll come out and talk to you all about how to advertise on For a Green Future. Okay, Rebecca, now it's time to talk with you about a strange new fish.
Yeah, and catfish are weird looking to begin with, okay? You know this if you've ever seen them.
That's true, yes.
And this one really stands out as weird looking among a whole genre of weird looking fish. It's a new thing they discovered which is actually a bristle-mouth armored catfish. I think possibly not the only one.
Armored catfish. That's a mouthful right there.
It is, and the weird thing about it is it has a giant head like a blob. It has a blob head.
Blob head.
Like those blobfish they get from the bottom of the ocean, only it really looks like that. It didn't just explode coming up,
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, this is a new species among 27 discovered in a major new study in Peru. They also found 49 species in this one area of Alto Mayo, the Alto Mayo region of Peru, which is part of the San Martin district, I think. So yeah, they did this survey. They found a whole bunch of species that are on the IUCN Red List, which means they're very seriously endangered. And the IUCN is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. I looked it up because I can't always remember abbreviations. So yeah, this is according to Science News 1226 article. Although I found a few articles about it actually. It turns out they know they're in it doesn't actually have a name yet, I don't think, but they're in the genus Chaetostoma. Chaetostoma. As far as I know, that is how you say it. So yeah, they also found in this study 34 species that live only in the Alto Mayo. So yeah, Chaetostoma in general, there was not a lot of information about the specific fish because they don't have any. Although the natives knew all about it. They're like, oh yeah, the marsupial mice and the blob-headed cat. Yeah, we see those all the time, So again, we discovered something
Right.
that was lying around in plain sight if you actually looked.
Yeah, congratulations on discovering something that...
Yeah. And they actually sent a local tribe out to help them do this survey. So, which is kind of just, yes, just tell us.
Probably the only reason they, quote unquote, found them, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, they're a genus of sucker-mouth armored catfish native to South America. And one species is all the way up in Panama, I guess. And they like foothills, they like flowing rivers. Their function, what are the benefits of this organism, Becca, you ask? Well, they're a prey animal. They control prey species like clams, snails, and frogs that you want a certain amount of, but not too many. They fertilize their environment also with their bodies and manure and all that stuff because fish go to the bathroom underwater. That's where they do everything. So, yeah, according to solitudeuk.management.com, I believe, their drawbacks are At least one chatostoma species is invasive in Florida. It's very, very invasive. It's big. It has no natural predators in that area. It eats a lot of stuff. It also can undermine the banks by burrowing into the shoreline to raise its young. So it'll turn your nice, neat little shoreline into eroding muck. So that's not good. Threats to this catfish, or catfish in general, would include overfishing, dams, algal bloom, which deprives them of oxygen, and which they also sort of help create in when they're invasive by the bank undermining, muck creation thing. Yeah, the tribe that helped out with the survey is called the Awajun people, and their territory is under threats. Their traditional way of life is being affected by or under threat from gold, oil, timber mining, and monoculture. And they traditionally live among the tributaries along the Marañón River, and there's also a population at the Alto Mayo River basin. So that's what they're doing up there. They're the second largest indigenous group in Peru, and they are hunters and subsistence farmers and fishermen, also called the Aguarura, I believe. There's a couple different names for them. So they possess tilled common lands in 4 provinces, including San Martin, and they basically escaped the Spanish and the Inca being assimilated because they are, quote, fierce via their fierceness and difficult terrain. So, in other words, they're like the Hmong. They're like the Hmong or Appalachian Americans. They went up there in the mountains to stop people interfering in their business, outsiders interfering in their business, and they're still at it. They're still fighting to kind of be left alone and do their thing.
That's cool. Sort of an
I also
epically
learned,
stubborn people. Yeah.
I also learned that catfish have, I believe it looks like a number. I assumed that they were all bottom feeders. This is what I thought, but no. Like the bigger ones are ambush predators. So apparently there are all sort of different catfish lifestyles. If you are a fisher person and wish to educate me more about this issue, go ahead and talk about catfish you have known.
Yeah, give us a call. Yeah, 877-909-1007. And I imagine once you get to a certain level of hugeness as a catfish, you kind of have to change your hunting styles and go for the bigger stuff. Yeah,
and they get big. They get really big.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Rebecca, for that interesting story about a new, quote-unquote, new set of critters that we've never seen before in Western science.
New in the same sense of the stuff that I get from Goodwill.
Exactly.
It's new to me.
All right. Okay, so on to ecological news. And I've got a number of stories to get through here. First one is related to our guest, and that is a development in the U.S. SLAP lawsuit that is being brought by the contractor that did the DAPL oil pipeline. They're suing Greenpeace for hundreds of millions of dollars for defamation. It's saying that Greenpeace hurt their reputation by suggesting that the oil pipeline that went through the indigenous people's land there could leak, and they're blaming Greenpeace for the entire Standing Rock thing that had tens of thousands of people come out and protest to try to block this pipeline. And so we've had guests before talking on that from Greenpeace, and so go back and look at our old episode to learn more about that. But the development that we're reporting on was reported in the North Dakota Monitor on October 8th, actually. The title is Greenpeace Seeks Sanctions Against DAPL Developer Over Records in Civil Lawsuit. So Energy Transfer is the company we're talking about here. And Energy Transfer claims that they are working in good faith. But the thing is that what Greenpeace asked them for were records of their pipeline leaks and breakages. Okay, seems like a fairly straightforward thing to ask for in a lawsuit where DAPL is claiming that their reputation is being hurt. And Greenpeace is suggesting, well, we said your pipelines leak. You have evidence that your pipelines leak. Give it to us in this lawsuit because you're suing us. And apparently the accusation is that DAPL is refusing to turn over the appropriate safety records. And so there's a question of, what is the reputation? Now, DAPL has turned over to Greenpeace 133,000 documents, but apparently they don't actually apply to what Greenpeace asked for. And that's actually a pretty common strategy if you're like an evil corporation, is you bury your opponents in paper. So merely giving them 133,000 documents forces them to spend time wading through them to finally discover that they didn't actually give them the very thing they're asking for. So the judge in the case has not yet ruled on this, but Greenpeace has asked them to sanction DAPL for refusing to cooperate, basically, because once you bring a lawsuit against somebody, they're allowed to ask you questions that would help their case, to defend themselves against your accusations. And so far, DAPL is not playing fair, according to Greenpeace. Okay, next story, going off to the UK, and this was December 20th in the website Current News UK. Title: Renewable power generation breaks records in UK. Curtailment increasingly costly. And there were 2 days in December so far where the wind power alone broke all kinds of records. According to the National Energy System Operator, on December 15th, wind was generating 22.2 gigawatts of power. And to put it in scale, a gigawatt is roughly the output of a nuclear power plant. So just wind turbines were providing as much power as 22 nuclear reactors. And that was a record on the 15th. And then they broke that record on the 18th when they put out 22.5 gigawatts of power. And this actually is part of a trend in the UK. The wind is taking over more and more of the electrical generation. In fact, the third quarter of 2024, renewables provided 50.5, more than half of all the electricity used in the United Kingdom came from wind. And that represents a 29% drop from 2023. So in just 1 year, almost a third drop in burning coal and oil and gas to generate electricity. And all that came from producing more and more wind power. Since 2021, the fossil fuel in UK has steadily dropped from about 40 terawatt hours down to about 20, and renewables has increased from about 35 terawatt hours up to 40. Nukes over in the UK have continued to just plod along at 10 terawatt hours, increasingly less important to the grid, but of course still producing tons of nuclear waste and so forth. And the part in the title referring to curtailment, there's an increasing problem as they put in more wind capacity of wasted wind power, because the grid can only take so much power above the demand. And so what they're doing is they're turning off wind farms in places like Scotland, but they have agreements with the wind farm owners, because it's not the wind farm owners' fault that they can't handle the electricity. So they still have to pay for the power, even though they turn off the wind turbines. And the reason they turn the wind turbines off and not the nuke plants is that the nuke plants are very inflexible. You need time to ramp them up and down, and it damages them to have their temperatures changing, because they operate so hot and cold that you just literally can't turn them on and off. But a wind turbine, literally just turn the switch and it stops generating. So unfortunately, nukes are kicking clean energy off the grid increasingly as the amount of clean energy on the grid increases. So, but good news, overall, very good news from the UK. They continue the march towards renewable energy generation. Okay, NPR story on December 24th. Title: 2023 was extremely hot, then came 2024. And the numbers aren't all in yet, aren't all finalized, but it looks like 2024 will be again a record breaker, will again be the hottest year on record. And unfortunately, it also looks like that this is the year that we breach the 1.5 Celsius increase, and that's the level that the whole world and the Paris Agreement agreed to never breach. That was the hard limit that we set. Now, it was a hard limit, but we didn't have like hard goals or hard penalties.
Enforcement of any kind.
It was just, we're
just kind of like, hey, you would sort of like to do this sometime, maybe,
Yeah, we're not going to let it happen.
It's a declaration of vague possible consideration of intentions. Great.
Right, and that was, Obama's signature accomplishment there, right? So anyway, that we promised it wouldn't breach that, and it apparently did in 2023. Every single month on the record in 2024 was the hottest month for, on record. So January was the hottest January, February was the hottest February, all the way through the year, all the way up to through December now. Now there's a global map that was put out by NOAA that shows record warm, and almost the entire globe had the record warmest to much warmer than average temperatures in 2024. That's despite La Nina trying to set up and lower global temperatures. We're still going up, not down. And of course, unfortunately, this is also a record year for fossil fuel use. So the whole idea that, are we going to make it at this point? We're still increasing the CO2 going into the atmosphere. So at this point, the answer is no, we're not yet. We have progress, but so far we're not going to get there in time yet, folks, because, as I said, all of us need to pitch in, and we're all not pitching in. Okay, so following that little bit of bad news, time for some good news. Reuters story on December 2nd. Norway stops deep sea mining for now. And we reported on this story before. Norway had a plan to start issuing licenses to companies to do deep sea mining of nodules, metal nodules that form on the sea bottom. And this practice, it was done experimentally a few times back in the 1970s, dredging up these little nodules that form like of manganese and iron and nickel.
It sounds just off the top of your head risky and expensive.
Yeah, well, it is risky and expensive,
right,
and completely destructive. It turns out that the areas that they did this back in the 1970s are literally completely dead. And when I say completely dead, I mean there isn't even bacteria.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Wow.
Right. And part of the reason for that was just discovered this past year, is it turns out that these nodules, as they're forming on the seabed, actually produce oxygen.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So there's no photosynthesis down there. And so scientists have long tried to figure out, well, how can we possibly have fish, swimming around when there's, nothing that we know of producing oxygen?
Right.
What it is are these nodules are producing the oxygen by electrolysis as they're forming. And so when you remove the nodules, you kill everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they stop forming.
Yes. Then there's no oxygen, nothing to breathe down there, and there's no light down there, and there's no heat down there. So, yeah. So, 32 countries have formally opposed this, said to Norway, what the heck are you doing? That's insane. But Norway still had a plan to start issuing licenses in the first half of 2025. But they have a parliamentary form of government, which means that different political parties have to agree to allow the government to exist. And if you have problems within your coalition, a coalition member could literally say, that's it, let's dissolve the government. And,
take their ball and go home.
Right, and everything has to stop, and they have to have new elections, and it's a big mess, but that is available to parliamentary systems. And there was a very small party, it's called the SV party, which wasn't in the coalition, but it supported the coalition. And so their support was vital, and they said, drop this.
Yeah.
Don't do this. And so they went into negotiations, and the ruling parties said, all right, we're not going to do that. That's the conservative and the quote unquote progress parties.
Okay.
That they're the ones, those are the two parties that want to destroy the earth. And so the SV said, no, we're putting our foot down. And so luckily, now they are going to have elections in September, and the Conservative and Progress and Labor parties are all saying, oh, we're going to do nodule mining. But the one thing to remember about this is that it takes literally millions of years for these nodules to form. So like 1 millimeter depth, or circumference takes about 1 million years.
Wow.
So if you dig them up, they're never, in human terms, they're never coming back.
Wow.
And so there's 3 startups in Norway that are ready to destroy the ocean. They were chomping at the bit, but too bad for you guys. So hopefully this prohibition will continue on through the next government that comes in September. Okay, interesting story in Ukrainian Pravda at pravda.com.ua. And that is on December 24th, Christmas Eve. They reported that Russian attacks dealt damage to critical substations of Ukrainian nuclear plants.
Spiffy.
That's according to the International Agency for Atomic Energy, the IAEA. And back in November and December, Russia has been sending over bombs and drones and attacking substations. And the Ukrainian energy minister said this is a direct threat to nuclear and radiation safety of all of Europe. And he's right.
I should say it is.
Because if any of the Ukrainian nuke plants melt down, like Chernobyl did, we know from experience that all that radioactive cloud of contaminants will float right over Europe. And there's still like fields in Scotland that you can't graze sheep on them because the radiation levels are too high.
Wow.
And they will be like that essentially forever. So the specific report from the IAEA says that there were 7 critical substations. And the thing is that, every country with nuclear power, including the United States of America, has given all their enemies nuclear weapons, because all you need to do, cut off the power to the nuke plant, make sure the backup generators can't operate, and boom, you've got meltdowns and you lose a huge swath of your country.
It just looks incredibly arrogant when you think about it. The way in the 20th century that America just decided, well, we are just so powerful and important that no one can ever touch us. So we can have all the nuke plants we want, and there'll never be a war, and nothing bad will ever happen.
Right. Yeah. And our society will never collapse because we're just too big and powerful.
So we can have this thing that requires constant human intervention, or terrible things will happen.
For hundreds of thousands of years.
Yes.
Yeah. Taiwan and Germany understand this strategically, and that's part of the reason they're getting rid of their nuke plants, because, they could see the handwriting on the wall. And just to sort of illustrate the foundation of this fear, the PSE&G, the electrical utility in New Jersey, has asked the FAA to ban all drone flights because over the past month, they've had a number of very suspicious drones flying over their Hope Creek and Salem nuclear plants. And so, who knows who's flying those drones or why, but it made PSE&G nervous enough that they've banned all flights of drones over that area. So we'll see what happens with that. Okay, moving along. We've got just a couple more stories and just a couple more minutes. Speaking of drones, Enbridge pipeline spill on November 11th. Okay, so what happened is on November 11th, Enbridge reported to the Department of Natural Resources, we've spilled 2 gallons of oil. And the DNR sent, inspectors over there, like, inspecting. But then on the 14th of November, they said, it wasn't 2 gallons, it was 126 gallons. And the DNR sent inspectors over, and they were like, inspecting.
They're only 124 off.
And then on December 13th, they said, we're sorry, it was 70,000 gallons.
Whoops. Little miscount there.
Right.
Doodle.
And the DNR sent inspectors over, and they're like, inspecting. But the problem is that they completely rely on Enbridge to tell them. But it's kind of like, if you ever watched Hogan's Heroes, remember Sergeant Schultz? Remember his line there? I see nothing.
Yeah, right.
I know nothing.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, obviously the DNR is in Wisconsin is completely
that actually
unable.
happened in a gap in my television viewing history, which I have some because raised by hippies.
Oh, okay. Well, that was a good one to miss,
Yeah.
I guess. But it was pretty funny. So, article in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel on December 20th, title, How Could Enbridge Oil Spill in Jefferson County Go from 2 to Nearly 70,000 Gallons? And they also linked this. This has happened with Line 6, which is a 465-mile oil pipeline. But this article links it to Line 5 because Enbridge wants to build a whole bunch of new pipelines. And those would go through near Lake Superior and actually go through the territory or go around the territory of the Kakagan River, or the Bad River Band of indigenous people. And the Kakagan River is the largest wild rice bed in the Great Lakes, which means in the world. And they want to put this pipeline right around it and right through it. And again, back to our original point, we should be winding down fossil fuel infrastructure, not building new pipelines. So interesting story there. And who knows, in 2 weeks, maybe they'll be like, oh, it wasn't 70,000. It was like 200,000. Who knows? We don't. And the Wisconsin DNR doesn't because they don't actually inspect when they send inspectors. All right, last story. Want to end on a positive note. PV Magazine on Christmas Day, 12/25. Batteries set to drive rapid solar growth. Essentially, batteries are down to a tenth of their cost from 10 years ago. They're faster. They can have microsecond responses to power dropping out. We've got cleaner batteries, lithium phosphate. 80% of the batteries are lithium phosphate now. Sodium batteries are coming online. We are doing it, folks. We're just not doing it fast enough. But some good news from PV Magazine. That's it for our show. Thank you so much for listening. Like I say, we're going to have a clip show next week. Definitely worth listening to. But
And I'm going to sleep in,
yeah, Rebecca gets to sleep in.
which is what really matters.
All right, this is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
We are signing off.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done.